I have been seeing things up there that I don't know that they're super unusual, but I think it's like anywhere that has decent habitat. If you get deep, it's kind of amazing what you find, and that's my intent on reporting on the cemetery tonight on Rist Canyon or wherever I'm talking about. Not that I want you all to go up there tomorrow. I don't want you to go up there tomorrow. But I guess my purpose is to try to show you that amazing things are available to all of us if we look closely, get on our knees, get a hand lens, look in all seasons, day and night. And that's my intent for talking about this. And I also wanted to dispute that green-tailed towhees are that fat-faced. They're not. Okay. So just west of us, west of LaPorte, up through Bellevue, a little bit further on 52E, you come to Rist Canyon. And it's not a particularly long stretch of road, maybe 25 miles. And you're covering roughly from 5,200 to 7,400 feet above sea level. And at first glance, it is pretty typical of the entire Front Range foothills. Okay. The canyon is named for this man, Joseph Rist, and he used to own a piece of the road. And he and his relative, Augustine, he sold it to Augustine Mason for 75 bucks. And Augustine and a relative of his owned a bridge over the Poudre just east of Rist Canyon. And they decided it was too expensive to keep it up, so they sold it to Larimer County. But it's named after that original owner of a piece of the road, Joseph Rist. Okay. But this is the area that I've been going to, and I'm not even going to tell you where it is, because I don't want you to go there. But that doesn't look too, I mean, that's beautiful, but full of cheatgrass and Doug fir, ponderosa pine. It doesn't look all that special if you've traveled a lot in the foothills. But this is the area where I just decided to kind of get deep and see what's going on. So if all of us should be aware of the fact that all of nature is an ever-changing world. And it used to drive me crazy when I worked for the State Forest Service and people would call me out to their property and they basically, without saying it, were saying, I want my place to stay exactly the way it is when we bought it, because that's why we bought it. And I was constantly reminding myself and them that nothing stays the same, and this is unrealistic what you're asking. And that is because of the natural phenomenon of succession. And the trip that a big live mature tree takes through its late years into death becomes a standing dead tree, and then it falls down, and then it starts getting disintegrated by various organisms and turned into elements that become the building blocks of new life. That's a pretty fantastic cycle. And it's very evident in Rist Canyon. The area that I have been going to is dominated by about half the trees, or big trees, are still standing, and about half of them are on the ground. And the logs on the ground are just as interesting, if not more interesting, than those live standing trees when you get down and really check them out. But bark beetles and fire, some diseases have been the driving forces of major change up there, and why we're getting to witness succession in a pretty vivid way. Okay. That's not, that phrase was applied to children raising, but I think it takes a village to break down a tree too. And it takes a lot of different elements, a lot of different organism groups, and all of them are important. And you can't say that one of them is the most important. I suppose ecologists would find a few of them, what they would call keystone species, around which maybe more other organisms directly revolve than others, but every one of those things is important. And the fact that we're going into this major extinction period on Earth is really disheartening, in that there will be a lot of organisms that go out that we don't even know exist, or we don't know what they do. We may find out after they're gone what they did. And, but everything is important. Everything is connected. And that's something we hear over and over again. Okay. So the first animal organism that's famous in Rist Canyon is a blue whale. And this whale was originally was a rock that was painted by kind of a colorful character in our local history named Polly Brinkoff, who I wish I had met. She used to work out at our State Forest Service nursery as a temporary in the spring when they were distributing trees. But I always heard about her. She lived up in the hills with her crazy brothers, and there were holes in the wall from gunshots. And I mean, she was a character, and she used to see saws that she would paint, regular saws used in sawmills. She would paint those with scenic paintings, and I wish I had one of them. But so this is the rock early summer, and then I went up there yesterday, and it was repainted, and nobody knows who repaints it. And I read an article in the local newspaper that maybe it's the ghost of Patty Brinkoff. Okay. So this canyon is where I first saw my first rattlesnake in Colorado. And I still think back to that moment at the mouth of the canyon, and I watched it crawl into a crack, and its tail was sticking out. And I grabbed hold of its tail because I didn't want it to go away. And so its head appeared a few inches above where the tail was going, and I decided that was not such a great thing to do, and I let him go in the rock. But I'll always remember my first rattlesnake, and it was in Rist Canyon. Ponderosa pine is my favorite tree. It's a dominant tree in our foothills, and magnificent tree. It smells like vanilla. I don't have a sense of smell anymore, but when I did, I used to love the smell of ponderosa pine bark or needles. And you might be surprised that there is a ponderosa pine in California that's 227 feet tall. Ours rarely get more than 80 or so, but I've seen some down in Durango that are probably pushing 100. But anyway, and the fact that there's one at Mesa Verde that was measured to be increment bore, read the rings, and it said it was over 1,000 years old. Okay. But ponderosa pine is subject to two major disturbances in our part of the world. Fire is one, and mountain pine beetle is the other. And when trees get mature, when the forests get dense and crowded, one of these two factors will inevitably come along. I used to get asked, what year are they going going to show up, the fire or the beetles. And I'm like, I'm not a soothsayer. I'm just telling you that they will come. And mountain pine beetle was last up in Rist Canyon in the early 2000s in a big way. And it will cycle back in probably another 10 or 15 years, and we'll see it again in a big way. And when it does, it kills trees in groups like you see in that bottom photo there. And if your house happened to be in the middle of one of those groups, you probably wouldn't like the mountain pine beetle. Those tracks and trails on the right photograph are, might as well be a fingerprint of mountain pine beetle, and anybody with forest insect experience could look at that gallery pattern and tell you that's mountain pine beetle, and all the bark beetles that are related to it make similar patterns, but not exactly like that. And you can actually tell which beetle you have by looking at the gallery pattern. But that little beetle the size of a raisin kills millions of trees in the West on every 25, 30-year cycle. Of course, wildfire has been really in the news lately, and it's been so great this summer to not have to see that smoky sky and smell the soot and feel your eyes burning that we've had during the early COVID years. It felt like the world was coming to an end or something. And the problem with the fires is that of course, climate change is making it hotter and drier, and then we've also taken fire out of its natural cycle because we've got too many people living in the trees. And Smokey Bear was invented, and he's done a pretty good job of trying to prevent forest fires. And we prevent them and prevent them and prevent them, and then when they happen, they're really horrific. And the fire behavior officers probably have thrown their books in the trash that try to explain wildfire behavior in the last few years, when these fires don't have a name one day and the next day they're number 5 in the history of the state because the wind blew them 10 miles. Fire is a whole new wild animal and acting not in ways we've ever seen before. But next slide. The fires, the last big fire in Rist Canyon was a High Park fire, of course, in 2012. And that was a scary thing. It came pretty close to the west edge of town, and firefighters are getting a whole lot better at protecting houses than protecting big acreages of natural forest. I remember when I joined the Forest Service and they tried to get us all to join the fire program if we were needed on an emergency basis, and they hand you a little tool called a Pulaski and teach you how to dig a little line in the dirt that's supposed to stop a fire. And you watch these fires jump Highway 14 and the Poudre River. And I think back to my little Pulaski, and like, I'm sorry I even pretended to present this as a threat to the fire. It was like embarrassing. But fires are doing things they have not done historically on a pretty scary repeat basis. Okay. But this is a picture I got online of the start of the fire, and you can see the beetle, clumps of beetle-killed trees in that picture. The fire scientists, Bill Rami and others that I've talked to, say there really isn't that great of a correlation between dead trees from beetles and then fires. It's a logical thing for us to think the beetles killed all these trees and they're just dead fuel out there waiting to ignite. But really, if you look at the maps of where the beetle kill is and where the fires start, historically, it hasn't been that great of a correlation. I think now it may be changing a little bit when these fires get going and they maybe start wherever they start, but when they get into those beetle areas under the winds that we're talking about now and the temperatures, I'm sure that maybe that's been changed a little bit in the thinking of the fire scientists, that the beetles are influencing a little bit of the intensity of those fires once they start. Okay. So here's the footprint of that fire just on a couple days in early June 2012. And so the Rist Canyon Road is running up east to west, and then you've got the Still Prairie Road running north-south. And just to get your bearings on where Rist Canyon is if you haven't been up there, but it makes a nice loop to start at Bellevue, go up through Rist Canyon, hit Still Prairie Road, turn right, head over to Poudre Canyon and back down the canyon. It's a nice loop drive if you want to see typical foothills habitat. Okay. Douglas fir is the other major conifer in Rist Canyon. I always harp on the fact that this is a hyphenated tree name, and it used to drive me nuts when foresters would call it Douglas, new word, fir without the hyphen. That would mean it's a true fir if we took that hyphen out of there. The fact that there's a hyphen tells you this is not a true fir. It's named after, the scientific name is named after the discoverer, Archibald Menzies, and the common name is named after David Douglas, who was a contemporary of Menzies and who got it named for him. But easy tree to identify from the cones on the basis of that bract that sticks out of the scales. It looks like a back end of a rat jumping into the cones. Use your imagination. But the main insect issue with Douglas fir is the western spruce budworm, a defoliator that chews the needles. It also has a bark beetle, the Douglas fir beetle, but it's not a very aggressive beetle, not as aggressive as mountain pine beetle. And I would say the dominant insect disturbance agent in Douglas fir is the spruce budworm, related to the eastern spruce budworm. Okay. The other common tree up there is aspen, and everybody loves aspen. And I cringe when I see all the newcomers moving to Colorado planting aspen in their yards at low elevation. Not a great tree for your yard at 4,000, 5,000 feet. This is a mountain species. It grows in clones and dense groves, and it's really not a very good tree for a yard that has limited water, kids, cats scratching it up. The bark is alive and very thin, and it's really not a great yard tree. But everybody that moves to Colorado's got to have an aspen, you know, to be a real Rocky Mountain person, but not a great idea for a yard tree. Okay. This is an interesting fungus, this Phalanus tremuli, called aspen trunk rot. And you've probably all seen those funny horse hoof looking things that on the side of the tree. And those are the fruiting bodies or the spore producing bodies of this fungus. And out of the bottom of that conch, C-O-N-K, millions, billions of spores are distributed. And wherever you see one of those, that tree in the interior is rotten for at least 2-3 feet on either side of that conch. And woodpeckers know this, and a lot of the excavated holes that you see in aspen are, you can find one of these Phalanus conchs nearby, because they know that those are the trees that are easily excavated because of the decay. Okay. So this is a beetle that probably everybody has seen also and wondered, what is that blue beetle with the black dots on it flying around, and they buzz kind of conspicuously, they often land on you. And that is a pleasing fungus beetle. It is pleasing, they're beautiful. And it makes its living chewing on the spore-producing surface of various fungi, including Phalaenus tremuli. And back in the day, entomologists used to use a material called carbon tetrachloride in their killing jars. And carbon tetrachloride was determined to be a pretty serious carcinogen, and they took it away, and we switched to other things, probably just as bad, like cyanide, sodium cyanide. But one thing that happened with certain insects that were killed in a carbon tetrachloride jar was that they would turn pink. And you may know that the U.S. Forest Service, at least they used to, I think they still do, had these big, really neat posters of flowers of the woods, birds, insects. And they had a poster of insects, and there was a pleasing fungus beetle pictured on that poster, beautiful pink beetle with black dots. And I know where that artist got they got it out of a museum somewhere, and they didn't know that the real one was blue. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. But that's the larva on the right. You would never guess that larva goes with that beautiful beetle, but they look kind of like a silverfish or something ominous, but they also graze on those surface of those fungi. Okay. And here's a couple of those beetles on the bottom of one of those conchs, just to prove to you they really do chew on those. Okay. So I said woodpeckers read those conchs and know this is an easy material to work, easier than a live tree without any decay. So they often excavate a hole, and sapsuckers, hairy woodpecker, three-toes, all have excavated holes in trees and downies in Rist Canyon. And in the area where I've been going a lot, there's a lot of these holes, and of course, holes are not just used by the makers. They soon get taken over by other organisms, and some of them are even more interesting than the maker. Okay. So this is a saw-whet owl using one of those sapsucker, maybe hairy woodpecker holes in Rist Canyon. Next picture. And there are two more woodpeckers, or two more owls that I've seen using aspen woodpecker holes, flammulated owl, and the northern pygmy owl. So seeing any one of those in a year is a thrill. And I have not seen those three owls in Rist Canyon since the High Park fire, but I don't know that that's because of the fire or not, probably not, but I used to drive up Rist Canyon and figure if I really cranked my neck out enough to hurt, I would see a pygmy owl somewhere in that drive up the Stowe Prairie Road. And I haven't seen one in a long time. There's still pygmy owls around. I've seen them at Gateway and some of the other places, but not in Rist Canyon. If they're there, they're getting less common, I think. Okay. Another absconder of holes is this little guy who's kind of, I have a love-hate relationship with red squirrels. I like them, they're cute, but they're always chattering, always acting like I'm Darth Vader or something. Just relax and go have a squirrel day, you know. I'm not evil, and but they act like you are. And right now they're up there gathering cones for their winter store. They cache hundreds, if not thousands, of cones from Doug fir and lodgepole pine. And I will admit to you that our nursery manager, Randy Munch, back in the day, told me he hunts for those and takes some of them for seed. He can get yelled at, but he deserves it. But he said he would never take more than half. So, okay. Anyway, that's the red squirrel, which is not red. I've only seen one bear up there and did not get a picture of it, but I have seen claw marks on the aspen trees. And I've seen plenty of things up there that could be potential food for bears. And that's kind of a setup photo arranged just in a nice cornucopia of potential bear food. But mushrooms and those green objects are a rare plant that you see up there, probably more up in Buckhorn than I've seen in Rist, but that's a hazelnut, a native little tree that we have in the foothills, beaked hazelnut. And those nuts inside that husk-looking thing are edible. I think bears do eat them, but most people don't realize we have a native nut tree in the foothills around us. And really, usually when you see them, that's a moist, rich, kind of a microsite that's a little wetter than most of our foothills. But on the north-facing slope. Okay. This is a moth. Paul, help me. I can't find anything about this moth, but it's a minor of the epidermis of aspen, and it makes these little tracks and trails all over. And there's very little written about it. I don't know that it causes any issue. I don't think the tunneling they do is ever enough to constitute a wound that might be infected by fungi or canker fungi. But very little known about this, and I've always had it in my mind, if I could ever figure it out, it'd be neat to write up the life history of that little moth. Anyway, I don't know, but I see that.
I'll see what I can find out and email you.
Okay, thank you, sir. This is something that you probably all see if you spend any time in aspen stands, but this kind of orange ooze running down the bark, and that is it's actually the sap that almost looks like an iron. It turns orange, but that is oozing from entry or exit holes of this longhorn wood borer called the poplar borer, the Suburta calcarata, and it's not a particularly colorful beetle, and I've only seen a few of them, but they usually, when they're emerging from the bark, you'll see a lot of sap flow all of a sudden starting, and maybe some sawdust, wet sawdust looking material coming out of the future exit hole as they're pushing their way out toward the outside. But they've spent their whole life cycle, probably a couple of years, in the xylem wood of the tree. But that's a common feature of aspen stands, okay? And this is a satyr comma butterfly that's coming to drink from the ooze from the wood borer activity. Quite pristine individual, probably recently came out of its chrysalis, and nice little butterfly related to the comma and the question mark. Okay. So you may have heard of creatures called leaf rollers. And this is a good example of what they do, but they usually it's a larval lepidopteran that emerges, and then somehow, I'd love to see a slow-mo or a time lapse of how they do this, but they get that leaf to roll and they tie it together with silk as they're making progress. And if you look in the lower right, you can see how tightly they've wrapped that thing and tied it all together with silk. And their job after they've done that is to eat their way out of their little house they built. And that supposedly affords them a little bit of protection, although I've seen certain birds like chickadees that know right away there's something in there and I'm going to pull it out. And they recognize the defect and they capitalize on it, but it has to afford some protection from the elements and other predators. or I don't think they would have evolved this complicated origami that they practice. But that moth up there is probably not the one that does that leaf roll, but it's a related tortricid that was up there in Rist Canyon, and the true moth that goes with that larva in the bottom middle has that same A-frame body style of the wings at rest. Okay. I'm not going to go through these various galls, but you see galls, and I think galls are really interesting. I have fun with kids, talking to kids about galls, because we can talk about insect piñatas and break them open. You can find the maker inside, and there's various kinds. Some that actually cause the wood to bulge, and others, most of them are on the leaves. But some are made by mites, some are made by flies, midges. And that woody one in the upper left is a fly, the poplar twig gall fly. Okay. And then it's just when you look at leaves, they're not the same. You know, what do we think of when we think of an aspen leaf? Golden yellow, and that's supposed to be the greatest thing that ever happened. Well, I grew up in Ohio, and yellow's cool, but you got to go back east. You got to go to Wisconsin or Vermont. But some aspen turn orange, and the one in the lower left is a disease. Marsanina is a fungus, causes those kind of rings on the leaf. That upper left is, we think, an expression of drought and extreme heat caused the areas between the veins to dry out. That's an aspen leaf beetle on the upper right, and then that lower right is what we call a serpentine leaf miner, and that's also a moth that's making, you can see where it starts at the left side, where it's narrow, and as it feeds between the upper and lower layers of the leaf, that little leaf miner becomes bigger and then emerges as a very tiny micro moth. But all these things make aspen leaves interesting. And I was up there one time this summer, and it was dead calm. There was no sound except for the occasional motorcycle that went up the canyon, or the biker that was going down the canyon at 60 miles an hour. That's one thing I've learned in Rist Canyon, is that strange noise you hear every once in a while. It's a biker going Mach 2. The sprockets are screaming, and it's like, what is this coming? And it's a guy on a bike that if he lost it, he would not have 1 inch of skin. But anyway, okay. So there's a few, I've seen a few spiders up there. This one is a crab spider, and it's typical waiting for prey pose. And it's easy to see how anything that came close to that would be latched onto. Next picture. Usually they're on a flower and they're invisible. And so that pose, half cocked, ready to go, and invisible. Butterflies or bees, other creatures that land on those flowers haven't got much of a chance to avoid it. It's very quick. I mean, it's a fraction of a second it takes for that to catch something. But that's the same crab spider species that was in the last picture, just in its normal environment where it's pretty hidden. Okay. So this one was successful. Seems like it might have eyes that are bigger than its stomach, but really take the wings off that ringlet, and there's a body there that it can handle. Go around the cob and suck the juice out of that and drop it. But you see that all the time up there. Crab spiders with butterflies. Okay. And usually they pretty well match the background they're on. And I think the same species can actually have different color phases to where it can blend in with the flower it's on, and actually can modify it's like a chameleon a little bit, change its some color to match the flower. But I believe that's a northern crescent, but crescents are difficult. That's for Paul. Okay. A few other spiders. Wolf spiders are all over the place up there on the left, and then that little tiny silk orb weaver, tiny thing, but just as good as a big garden spider. Just small and we never notice them, but just as beautiful. Okay. These are crab spiders, a different group of crab spiders, and they both have an ant, a black ant and a red ant. So I say they're making the ants say, "Uncle." They're supposed to laugh. Okay. And here is a house wren. It's one big food web. So we got the spiders catching insects and the wrens catching spiders. Cooper's hawk catching the wren. Probably a great horned owl catching the Cooper's hawk. But that's definitely a Thomason spider in that house wren, going to be delivered to the kids. Okay. This I want to see once, but this is a cool jumping spider. Phidippus tyrelli. I want to see it once. It was on a big ponderosa log, and I turned my back and it went somewhere, and I got this one sort of in focus photograph, but that's a handsome little spider. And it was hunting the mostly barkless log. There was some bark on there. It probably lived on it, but I've only seen it once. I did turn it into iNaturalist. I thought that was worthy of putting in the database, but okay. Robber flies are a special group of flies that seem to have more aficionados than other flies. And there are people that do robber flies, and there's books out now on field guides to robber flies. Once we do a field guide for something, then there's going to be a whole bunch of people that develop an interest in. We just have to kind of have some book that we can use to help us get a name on something. And as soon as they came out with dragonfly books, man, there's all kinds of dragonfly people and robber fly people, tiger beetle people. These are, Rist Canyon is full of robber flies, and it's a very diverse set of robber flies up there. And these are predators. These are the F-16s of the insect world, and they will catch everything they can catch. And that big one on the left is obviously a bumblebee mimic, Laphria finaldi, and that creature is always on a log, and he zooms off and gets prey and comes back, and they seem to have favorite perches that almost like a territory. And but the other robber flies, the upper one, the Apharia, those are hard to identify the species. And then the lower one's a sort of pogon, a smaller robber fly. But these things are predators and definitely upend in their little world. Okay. These are all three more robber flies that are up there, big ones. And these are all the larvae probably develop in wood. And they are on the trunk of trees or on logs. And one on the right, I've only seen a couple of times, and I don't think it's too common. Okay. There's a robber fly with I call it a dogbane beetle. It's not the dogbane beetle, but it's all that. It's always on dogbane, and haven't been going over to the collection for the last several months, and so I can't figure out what it is, but it is a beetle on dog bane. That beautiful robber fly ended its life. Okay. It's a big leaf cutter bee. Fell prey to another robber fly. Okay. So this willow is all over Rist Canyon, and we have 30 plus species of willow in Colorado. And if you think Empidanax flycatchers are hard, try doing willows. But this one, Schooler's willow, is one of the few that commonly occurs away from water. So it's not necessarily a wetland. There's a few other willows that grow away from water, but most of them need water nearby. But this one, I got interested in it because of something I'll show you here in a second. Okay. So this is the flowers beginning to produce the seed. And you can see the leaves are not particularly anything special. They're kind of wider than most willow leaves. Okay. There's the pussy willows, this particular kind of willow. Beautiful buds when you look at them up close in the spring. Okay. This little syrphid fly that mimics wasps was got that lapping and sponging type mouth part. You could just see it going along the surface of the leaves, and I think it was grazing on spores. Spores are honeydew of other insects, but it's definitely gleaning something on the surface of the leaf. Okay. So was this one, which is a fly called the Loxoniid, and it was definitely getting fungal spores. That's their MO. It looks like an albino, or maybe it's a young fly that hasn't darkened up yet, but that's the way it stays, that pale yellow. Okay. Looks like it has a gas mask on it. And then this is a sawfly, which sawflies throw people off because they're actually wasps. You know it's not a fly because the fly is combined with another syllable. So if it was a true fly, it would be saw, new word, fly. Sawfly, one word, you know, it's fly-like, but it's something else other than a fly. Okay. I don't know, I have no idea. Hope the guy's book comes out on Western caterpillars. There's a great book on Eastern caterpillars, and the same man who did that one supposedly got one in the works for Western caterpillars, and I can't wait till it comes out. Okay. This is another type of sawfly that folds the leaf over. So it feeds along the edge, and it causes the leaf to bend and fold over top of it. And then if you peel it up, you can see the creature inside there, but it's a little sawfly larva. Leaf folding sawfly. Okay. Now this is what got me intrigued with Schooler willow. These little, look like, I call them rosettes. It's some kind of a gall. And I cannot figure out what is making those. I have no idea. It has to be a mite, an eriophyte mite that requires microscopic examination, because I've torn those apart in all stages and there's never anything in the middle of it. We got regular leaves, upper left and lower right, and then these rosettes, that was a leaf bud, and it just caused the bud to form into that little cool rosette. Okay. So there's two of them on the left and one on the right starting to form, and I can never figure out what is in the middle of them to make it do that. I think it's got to be a mite, very fine mite. Okay. Later in the winter, you could make a wreath out of these things. They're woody and they're kind of cool looking, hard. Like those on the left are hard. They feel woody, and they're very interesting little. I call them rosettes, but what does it? It's a mystery. Orchids are one of the major things up there that has attracted attention of visitors, unfortunately. There's at least 5 kinds up there, and I think I heard at one point there might be 7. And sometimes these rare plant people take field trips up there, come from Boulder and other places to see the orchids. And these are 3 of them. You've probably all seen the fairy slipper orchid, maybe seen coral root. That frog orchid was new to me this summer, and my friend Pam Smith figured it out for me. Beautiful little things. Okay. And probably the most famous flower up there is the yellow lady slippers. Gorgeous plants. And we have another lady slipper orchid that I've never seen in Colorado. I think it's higher elevation than wrist, but it's a brownish purple. Supposedly it's in Rocky Mountain National Park, but I've never seen it. Okay. So I mentioned there's some problems in Rist Canyon, and the reason why I'm not telling you where I'm going is because of some of these problems. But there's lots of tree digging up there, lots of poaching of orchids. Some areas the U.S. Forest Service has installed cameras to catch whoever's doing this. I see potholes in the woods all the time. I saw somebody doing it one day. They put a box of plants in their car and drove off before I could get up to them. But and they were being led by a prominent person around here, and it's stuck in my craw ever since, because I think the guy took them there and they stole some plant. But anyway, there's been paintballing, and there's been litter, people carving their names on the trees, and then we got the fire aftermath with erosion and the cheatgrass. It's going to be a big problem up there, I think. But so it's not like this area is without its issues, like all of our front range issues are. And you know, we're in danger of loving stuff to death, I think, in some cases. Okay. There's another interesting plant up there called pine drops. This is basically a parasitic plant that's living off the roots of other, probably lodgepole pine most of the time. But it does that in concert with some fungi that are kind of intermediaries between the roots of the pine drops and the roots of the host plant. And that fungus moderates the transfer of material. So mycorrhizae are pretty important, and we don't know much about them. Okay. And this is a plant I haven't seen. I've traveled all over the state in my job for the Forest Service, and I've only seen wood lilies a couple of places. And they were up there last summer, not this summer. And I hope it's not because they got all dug up, but I think maybe they just don't bloom well every year. This year was an off year for a lot of things, but okay. I think side bells, Princeton, and I think that's what this is. Okay. And this is by no means any kind of an exhaustive coverage, and Paul would know a lot better than I do about this, but ringlet's probably the most common butterfly I see most of the summer up there. Okay. And I've seen all 4 of these kinds of elfins, which are basically related to hair streaks. But they're all subtly beautiful in their own little difference from their other ones. And some of these are the first butterflies we see in the spring most years. There may be some of the ones that overwinter that we see earlier. But as far as ones that hatch and appear very close, these are some of the earliest butterflies we see in the spring. I mean, March, maybe even February, you can see these things. Some of them, like the mosses, real early. And then various whites. Not every white butterfly you see is a cabbage white, like I used to naively think. There's a lot more than this. Maybe not up there, but there's a lot of whites in Colorado. All beautiful, especially the underside of the wings. Okay. And I'm sure I'm missing some of the skippers. Skippers are another hard group to identify, but these are ones that I've photographed, and Paul and Scott Ellis have helped me out with some IDs. And, skippers they're not typical butterflies. You can tell just by the way they act. They're a special group. And lots of them and very difficult to identify. Okay. He just seemed to think that cone was his. He was just in tall cotton on that cone. He kept coming back to that cone, and I think it was a territorial male. Okay. Yeah, it used to have. I think it's. I'm not. It's more than an anecdote. I think the owls are not as common up there as they used to be. Maybe they're moving higher on the mountain, or moving to areas that don't have as much human visitation. Like Rist Canyon's not is way busier than it used to be. But I've seen tree-toed woodpeckers in this area up there. But like as far as I can figure, it's the lowest elevation that they've been recorded breeding in the state. It used to be ovenbirds you could count on up there. I didn't hear him this year. Okay, but that's a list of what I think are typical breeding birds up there, and none of those are unexpected, I don't think. I mean, ovenbird and the little owls are probably the most charismatic ones, but I've never seen the dusky grouse up there, but I know they're there. Just never seen one. Now we got to pay attention to these red crossbills, because we might actually have a cassia crossbill around if we, probably not, but there's lodgepole up there, so maybe. Okay. So I was going to ask you to find the nest, but that was unfair. But that's where it was. I kept seeing this little flycatcher going to this tall stump. And okay, next. And there was the nest, and that broken off part of that stump. Next. Look kind of grumpy. So I think it did think I could see it, but it's like if you do see me, dude, get away. It definitely looked tacked off. Okay, I didn't stay long, I promise. So there have been ovenbirds up there, and try to find one. When you hear them singing, try to find one. I found a few of them, and they look like they're singing in all their glory. When you actually see them, man, they raise up and belt it out. Okay. So I saw this, and I knew I was near a nest. And I've always been intrigued by ovenbirds because my grandfather, who lived in Vermont and had a tree farm, would always bring my mom something, his little girl, something that he found in the woods every day. And one day he brought her an ovenbird nest, which he said he'd watched all summer and the bird was gone. And so it looks like a Dutch oven. You know, it's side entrance, and it's really cool. And I've always been kind of, ovenbirds have been kind of special in my history because of my grandpa. But so I saw this bird with caterpillar, and I thought, I gotta watch what it does. And next picture, it was feeding this bird, which if I just showed you that picture and said, what is that? What would you say? Would you guess that's a fledged ovenbird? And I think we need a book that shows, I mean, there is a book on eggs and young birds, but it's, you know, doesn't cover very many species, and we need a better book. Maybe it's going to be an online thing, but it'd be nice to have an archive of fledgling birds of North America. It'd be kind of neat. Okay. What's that? Lumbius vireo, and this is a common bird of the foothills, Ponderosa pine, Doug fir kind of forests. I heard one up there yesterday singing, which I thought was kind of strange that it was singing, but would think they'd be migrating now, and maybe it was a young of the year that was filling his oats and starting to try his song out a little bit before he took off. Next picture. So I went up there right after the High Park fire, and I actually found this nest in a Doug fir that was dying from the fire. It was at a kilter, and it looked like it had been through something serious, but that bird was incubating and raised babies out of that nest. Okay. High up on the hill, you can hear them singing, and it's a glorious sound, the hermit thrush up high on the hill. So, you know, probably up at the top of the peaks, which might be close to 8,000 feet in the wrist, that's where they are. And then, of course, further west, higher up, all the way to Cameron, they're up in the high country. But hermit thrush is the resident thrush up there in the summer. Okay. Now all these birds of color are up there, and lots of them. And I like to go up the canyon with my windows down and try to see how many I can get before I get to my area. And you hear lazuli buntings and McGilvrays warblers and yellow warblers and house wrens and towhees, you know, rufous-sided towhees and zinging broadtail hummingbird males every time in the June in that lower canyon, right inside the mouth. Okay, Virginia warbler's kind of special up there. So I've really been interested in these things that make holes and live in holes. And it starts with woodpeckers. They're the prima donnas, the diva hole makers. And then you've got all this other stuff that quietly goes about making smaller and smaller holes in these dead trees, fallen trees, logs, branches. Okay. But all these things are involved with holes. And the hairy woodpeckers bringing a wood boring insect that was making holes in the wood to its young to feed. That flat-headed wood borer on the right, or metallic wood borer, is another borer in wood. It makes oval-shaped holes. longhorn wood borer in the lower left, and monocamus is a hole maker. And then those big horntail wasps sticks that ovipositor, that black organ coming out the back end, that's the ovipositor, and it sticks that somehow into wood and lays an egg in there. So these are all hole makers, okay? This little Pemphidontid wasp makes holes in the pith of plants. Those tunnels through the wood of that log are made by little bark beetles that actually grow fungus in those tunnels and eat the fungus. They're called ambrosia beetles, and there's several species. They grow fungus in their hole and then eat the fungus. They garden with fungi. All these things are up there, and it's fascinating to watch them. Lots of leafcutter bees that are feeding on flowers, nectar in flowers, taking holes out of the petals, wrapping that hole, that disc that they cut out of a petal, filling that with pollen, making it into a pita pocket, stuffing that into wood. There's some serious stuff going on up there. Bees and wasps going in and out of tunnels. You know, the little one in the upper right is a very small pompilid spider wasp. Provisions the tunnel that somebody else made with spiders. So they're going in and out of these little tiny holes. Cuckoo wasp. That's a cuckoo. That's a leafcutter bee in the upper left. That looks. I thought it was a cuckoo wasp, but Boris straightened me out that that's actually an osmia leafcutter bee. And so it's just. I don't pretend to know what's going on most of the time, but it's just like you're watching a football game or something. Okay. So we'll get through these pretty quick. These are the honorable mention ones. How much time we got tonight?
Another 5 minutes or so.
Let's crank.
Keep the mic up, Dave.
Crank. Okay, so here's Big Bad Leroy Brown. This is I put a bunch of, first time I put mountain pine beetles in a bottle on my job. You know, I'm a forest entomologist. Pine beetles are my big thing. I put some in the jar. I put one of these in the jar. I got home, I had him and parrots. They eat mountain pine beetles in spades, and they are hang out on the bark, and the bark beetle lands and they chomp them down. Okay, it's called a claret beetle or a checkered beetle. This is another kind of checkered beetle that mostly eats nectar on flowers. Okay, red raspberries are up there, and there's this plume moth that I always see on raspberry, and I think it's associated with it. And then this chipmunk is always fighting me to get to the raspberries, and he usually wins. Okay. There's two plume moths mating as if they don't really like each other, but I'm interested, but not that interested. Okay. This little thing, nobody knows what that snout's for or what. I'm not sure what it is. It's not a mouth part. It's called a dictyopharid plant hopper. And they're all over up there in the understory. You take a net and sweep through the grass and weeds and get 20 of them. Okay. Mormon crickets are up there. We have a solo lone mountain form is that green one usually. The ones that form the big swarms that are famous in Utah. The California gulls saved the day when the Mormon crickets plague came across. They're usually gray, those swarming ones, but I see both kinds up there. But I've never seen a swarm up there. I just see these individual ones. Okay. That's the coolest little wasp on earth. Most my pudgy little 1/8 of an inch thing, but man, is it cool up close. Parasites and hyperparasites. So they're parasites of parasites. Another one of these things in the holes of old dead trees. Okay. Snake flies all over up there. Major predator, both larvae and adults. They look pretty weird. They look like a snake or a reptile. Okay. Probably the most common rodent up there is Microtus, this vole. I did put some live traps up there and it was always these guys. Okay. Those aren't real eyes. Those are eye spots, and the real eyes are up on the head and the front. Little black eyes, and those eye spots are supposed to scare you if you're a predator. That's a big click beetle, that big, and they're in these old dead ponderosa pines. They live as a borer. The larval click beetle is called a wireworm, and it lives in the wood. This is a fly that looks like a bumblebee. Great mimic. Yeah, that's pretty awesome mimicry right there. That's a fly, hoverfly. Okay. Leaf hoppers, lots of different kinds. They're all cool. Entomologists don't care because they're too little, too hard. But I'm sure there's a leaf hopper guy that loves them. They're just too little. Okay. Lichens, beautiful. Next. Lichens, more lichens. I don't know much about lichens, but they're neat. Combination of algae and fungi. Okay. This is a pretty moth that feeds on buckwheat and sunflowers. Okay. I thought that was a mealybug or some kind of that is the larva of a certain kind of ladybird beetle. Amazing. Okay. Those are the hard closed cones of lodgepole pine waiting for fire to melt the resin holding them together so they can throw their seed down on the burned forest to start the next forest. They're called serotinous cones. They don't open usually unless they're exposed to heat or a red crossbill beak or a red squirrel. Those are moths, again, look like they mimic wasps. One of them's on fireweed, one's on geraniums, as the larvae feed as borers. Okay. So you've been in the woods in this June. Clicks, who's doing that? Who's got the big lighter? It's this cicada. This is a cicada that doesn't have that shrill buzz like some of the cicadas that you're used to hearing back east or in the Midwest. They click and they lay their eggs in a wound on a twig, like on the left. You can see those scars, and that's where the eggs are laid. The eggs hatch, drop to the ground, and feed on roots as nymphs, and then emerge every once in a while as adults. Putnam cicada. Okay. Lots of shrubs up there, and if you like shrubs, there's a lot to figure out. The understory is full of them, and the early succession, these forests that are opened up because the big trees were killed and fall down, shrubs are in their heyday for that period of time. Okay. Cool little tree hopper. Okay. Slime molds, one of which is called a dog vomit slime mold. Awesome name. Okay. Ips beetle tracks, bark beetle tracks an engraver beetle that engraves the wood. Okay. These things land on my hat all the time, and I find out they're feeding on deer. It's a deer kid. They're very strange little flies that cling onto you, and you can tell they're used to getting down in the fur and then feeding on blood. Okay. There are pinyon pines up there in Rist Canyon, and Frank Coxworth, who used to be the research scientist at the experiment station, Forest Service experiment station on Prospect, told me that Clark's nutcrackers feed on that Owl Canyon pinyon grove, and then you see them flying off to the west to cache pinyon nuts. Some of them don't get found, and that's why there's pinyon up in Rist Canyon and Buckhorn Canyon and Red Feather, and it's from Clark's nutcrackers caching seed from Owl Canyon in the mountains to the west. Frank was a cool guy. I wish he was still around. Okay. And then this is my favorite insect I found up there. This is really little tiny wasp, but man, that thing's got to be doing something special. And it actually is a parasite of that weevil and that little flat-headed wood borer that feeds on the flowers. And I did find a name for it. I turned this one into iNaturalist also and got that genus Eusandelum. But next picture. I mean, we think we invent everything. We didn't invent nothing. Okay. Anyway, I thank all these people, especially Boris. Next. That's the way a green-tailed towhee really looks. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. That was fantastic. We're gonna take the time we have available for questions, but I just wanted to make sure before people dash off that to say a word about next month's program. We're going to be hearing from Don Ireland, who is a writer and winner of a Habitat Hero Award. Don's going to be talking to us about conservation and planting native species to help with pollinators. We'll learn how to save water and boost our pollinator populations while making our lands more beautiful. So that's my announcement out. Next month, it's the second Thursday, 7 p.m. We hope you can join us. I'm going to use the remaining time to field questions for Dave. If you're here in the Senior Center, raise your hand and we'll call on you. If you are on Zoom, you can type a question into the chat window, and if any of those come in, we'll read them out loud here. So questions for Dave?
Well, I've got a box of insects up here that I've collected this summer from the Rist. If you want to look at them, the little blue one's not in there. The little Eusandelum, it's already been turned in. Anyway, it's, believe it or not, I could have put 3 times as much in here, and I had to limit it to 110 slides or something. This is just touching the surface. I could go up there 1,000 times in my remaining days and not scratch the surface of what's going on up there. And that's the beauty of nature, is that we can just keep going, and it's a adult classroom, adult learning, and you're never done. You never get your degree. Getting deeper and deeper. You find out, oh, there's robber flies. I'm not interested in robber flies. I dig into lichens or whatever it is that catches your eye. But that's the beauty of it. And when we're falling out of our wheelchairs, we can keep doing it.
So, Dave, it looks like we have a question in the chat window there.
If the question is about how significant up there is dwarf mistletoe, it's up there. I've seen dwarf mistletoe, Arcithobium americanum, which is the one that's in lodgepole pine, is up there. I've seen some growth habits in the crowns of some of the ponderosa that indicated the ponderosa mistletoe is up there also. But I would say it's a major impact up there, not nearly like fire and pine beetles. I mean, the impact of mistletoe, it's a very slow spreader. On its own, it's got explosively discharged seeds, and supposedly a clump of mistletoe that's growing on a branch at the top of a big ponderosa pine can shoot out 60 feet when those seeds are exploding and shooting out of the underwater pressure. But most of the time, the seeds don't go near that far. And once it's introduced into a forest, it creeps through there, a matter of meters per year until a chickadee is messing around on a bough that has mistletoe. One of those seeds shoots and sticks on the feather, and the chickadee flies, 50 miles or 20 miles and preens itself, and the seed comes out. And they've discovered it, like Manitou Experimental Forest down by Colorado Springs, that a lot of the long distance spread of mistletoe is by vertebrates, by birds and squirrels. And so those seeds, the end of the summer, August is usually when the seeds are, and foresters, forestry students quickly learn at Pingree or when they're going to forestry camp how to shoot those seeds at your buddy and stick them on the back of somebody's hair. So at the end of the summer, when those seeds are explosively being discharged, that's when any animal that's in that area is likely to trigger an explosion and could get a seed on it and then fly somewhere and clean itself and knock that seed off. The seeds are very sticky, and they slide down a needle, or they put their roots into the whatever they land on a branch, and that's the way a new infection starts. But usually in our area, it just affects the architecture of the crown. So maybe those trees aren't as valuable for lumber, they're not as straight, they're clumpy looking, they're kind of distorted looking, but biologically, they're very interesting, and Mexican spotted owls nest on mistletoe brooms. So, I mean, they're serving a purpose. Mistletoe's not all bad.
Maybe one more question in the back.
I just was wondering if you've ever seen any fireflies.
Could you repeat the question, Dave?
So the question was, have I seen any fireflies in Rist Canyon? I have not. I have seen fireflies in Fort Collins at Riverbend Ponds natural area, the shod lane that goes off of Overland Trail. I was out there with Whitney Cranshaw, a friend of mine, an entomologist, said you ain't an entomologist unless you spend 4th of July in the firefly area instead of going to City Park. So I went to the firefly area out on the shod lane and saw fireflies for my first time in Colorado, and I'm walking out in there to get a little closer, and I stepped on this kid that was tripping in there. Like, wow, dude. Sorry. Yeah, so there are fireflies here, but I haven't seen them. Let's see. It's not, they need wet grass, and there's not a lot of wet grass up there.
I think we probably have to
Liz,
cut it off there.
Liz has got one more question.
Yep, one quick
Gosh,
question.
those insect photos were so great. It's just amazing. Is there a quick, easy way to tell the difference between the flies that are mimicking, looking like a wasp or a bumblebee? I mean, those were just amazing.
Yeah, usually you can tell by the mouth parts. If you get it close or get it in a vial and look at it up close, you can tell it's got, just erase the color and look at the structure, and it's the color that's throwing you off. That, man, it looks like a bumblebee, or it looks like some other kind of hymenopteron. And they want to look like those scary creatures when they're not scary. And but I would say it's usually the mouth parts, or maybe the wing variation is very different. But that's, those are kind of fine points that most people wouldn't look at. But
I'm afraid we have to cut it off there,
Okay.
Dave. Thank
Thanks
you
very
so
much.
much. That was fantastic. Our thanks to everybody who joined us on Zoom as well. We hope to see you again next month.